I was camping at a state park in Texas, one of those places where the woods thin out into marshes and lakes, and the air feels heavier at night. It was the middle of summer, hot even after the sun went down, the kind of thick heat that sticks to your skin no matter how still you sit. My tent was pitched in a designated campsite, tucked among some pines and scrub, but I wasn't ready to call it a night after dinner. I had my dog with me, restless and alert, and I decided I'd take him down to the dock and get in some night fishing. The dock wasn't far, maybe a 5-minute ride on my bike. I pedaled through the quiet roads of the park, the beam of my headlamp catching little flashes of insects, the crunch of gravel under my tires echoing in the dark. When I reached the parking area near the dock, I left my bike leaning against a post about 100 feet back from the shoreline. Beyond that, the land sloped down into wet marsh grass that stretched 20 or 30 feet before it met the actual dock. That whole strip was soggy, patches of water glinting faintly in the glow of the lamps. The dock itself pushed out over the lake, a long stretch of weathered boards with a single tall light that buzzed faintly, casting a yellow circle over the water. I walked out with my rod in one hand, my dog trotting at my side, his nails clicking against the wood as we stepped onto the planks. He was excited, tail up, sniffing the air, though I kept him close. I set up near the end of the dock, where the boards swayed slightly with each step. The lake stretched out wide and flat, so still it looked like glass, reflecting the faint glow of the sky. The air was damp, thick with the smell of water and algae, the occasional hint of mud drifting up from the shoreline. I cast my line, the splash breaking the silence, and then we settled in. For the first 20 minutes, it was peaceful. Just me, the faint tug of the line in the water, and my dog lying near my feet, ears twitching at every insect hum. I leaned back against the railing, eyes wandering across the water. There wasn't another person in sight. The campground was far enough back that all I could see were faint dots of lantern light between the trees. Out on the lake, it was just darkness. Then I noticed it. At first, I thought it was a log drifting near the surface. A long, dark shape sliding silently across the water. The kind of thing you might dismiss in passing if you weren't really looking. But something about it made me lean forward, line forgotten in my hands. The water was too still for anything to drift naturally, and the shape wasn't bobbing like wood. It was moving with purpose, gliding closer. My dog's head shot up, ears rigid, nose pointed at the water. He let out a low growl, deep and steady, the kind he made when something wasn't right. The shape slid nearer, and then the light from the dock hit it just enough to reveal what I was looking at. 2 glowing eyes. A gator. Not just any gator. This thing was massive. Its back was wide, ridged with the raised bumps of its skuts, trailing behind it like a floating log. It looked like a tree had come alive and was drifting in, slow and steady, until those eyes locked with mine. For a second, my chest tightened in a way I can't even describe. There's something about seeing an animal like that close, knowing it doesn't just exist in your world. It dominates it. The water was its home, not mine. The way it moved, silent and unhurried, made it worse, like it knew it had all the time in the world. I froze, watching it. My dog whined and shifted closer to me, still tense, still staring. The gator stopped a few yards from the dock, just sitting in the water. Its body floated still, tail stretched behind it, head raised just enough above the surface that its eyes gleamed in the lamplight. It didn't lunge, didn't thrash. It just stayed there, watching. I thought maybe it would drift away eventually. Maybe it was just curious. So I went back to fishing, trying to steady my nerves, though every splash of my lure hitting the surface felt like it might be pulling the thing closer. And that's exactly what it did. Every time I shifted sides, it followed. If I cast to the left, it drifted left. If I moved to the right railing, it slid across silently until it was beneath me again. Always watching, always just there, close enough that I couldn't forget about it. Hours passed like that, 3, maybe more. The night stretched on, the air growing cooler, my dog alternating between pacing the dock and lying stiff against my legs. I caught myself staring at the gator more than I watched my line, the weight of its presence pressing down with every minute. It never made a sound, never broke the surface, just that silent shadow waiting. Finally, I decided it was time to leave. I reeled in my line, gathered my things, and stood. My legs felt stiff, my throat dry. The gator shifted as soon as I moved, its body gliding closer to the shoreline. That's when I felt the fear sharpen, because it didn't just stay in the water. As I stepped back down the dock toward the marsh, it followed, sliding toward the wet grass. I could see the bulk of it moving, that thick tail stirring the water, its head staying fixed in my direction. I froze halfway down the dock, my dog pressed tight to my leg, growling again. I looked ahead, at the marsh grass swaying faintly in the stillness. My bike sat 100 feet away in the parking lot, just a faint silhouette against the dark. But between me and it was the shoreline, and now this gator pulling closer, closing the gap. I knew gators could run fast, faster than people gave them credit for. And my dog, if that thing charged, my dog would throw himself at it. There'd be no stopping him. The thought of it made my stomach drop. My mind scrambled for options. I had nothing, no weapon, no stick, no knife worth anything against something that size. All I had was the slim chance of buying time. And then it came to me. I stepped to the far side of the dock, heart pounding, and pissed into the water. The stream splashed loud in the silence, rippling the glassy surface. For the first time, the gator shifted with urgency, its massive head turning, body gliding toward the sound. My distraction worked. It swung away from me, searching the water where it thought something had splashed alive. The second its attention broke, I grabbed my dog by the collar and ran. My boots slammed against the boards, the dock groaning under my sprint. The marsh grass blurred past as I pounded through it, mud sucking at my soles, my dog straining ahead. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if it had followed. The 100 feet to my bike felt like a mile. My breath burned in my chest, every step filled with the thought that something huge was right behind me. I reached the bike, fumbled with the handlebars, shoved my dog's leash around my wrist, and jumped on. My legs pumped, tires slipping on gravel, and then we were flying down the park road, the night air whipping against my face. I didn't stop pedaling until the glow of the campground lights broke through the trees. Only then did I let myself glance back. The road was empty, silent, just the night pressing in. I coasted to my campsite, hands shaking as I dismounted. My dog was panting hard, eyes still wide and wild. I collapsed onto the cooler, chest heaving, staring back into the black woods. Nothing followed. Nothing came out of the water, but I knew it had been there, waiting, watching, following every move I made until the last possible second. That night, lying in my tent, I couldn't shake the image of those glowing eyes in the dock light. How still they'd been, how patient, and the thought that maybe, if I hadn't made that distraction, I might never have made it back to camp at all. I was hiking in the Appalachian Mountains, one of those long, winding trails where you can walk for hours without seeing another soul. The kind of place where the trees grow so thick over your head that daylight filters down in patches, and the forest floor stays damp even on hot days. I'd been out since the morning, moving at a steady pace, enjoying the kind of solitude you only really get deep in the woods. No traffic, no voices, just the sound of my boots on dirt and leaves, the buzz of insects, and the occasional rustle of squirrels or birds flitting through the branches. The trail wound along ridges and dipped into hollows, always curving around something, always hiding what came next. The air was heavy with the smell of damp earth, moss, and pine. Sweat had already soaked through the back of my shirt, but the shade kept it from being unbearable. Every now and then, I'd stop, take a sip of water, and just listen. The quiet out there has a weight to it, like the woods are always holding their breath. I was a few miles in when it happened. The trail dipped and curved around a slope, and as I rounded the corner, I stopped dead in my tracks. Not 20 feet ahead, in the middle of the path, was a Saond black bear and her cub. For a second, my brain refused to process it. One moment the trail was empty, the next it was filled with muscle, fur, and presence. The sow was broad and solid, her back high enough that she looked almost like a moving boulder with legs. Her coat was dark, nearly black, and her muzzle was streaked with lighter brown. The cub, half her size, clung close to her side, its small frame quick and jittery compared to her slow, deliberate movements. She had her head down, pawing at the dirt of a hillside, flipping it up in clumps, nose pressed close to the ground as she worked. The cub mimicked her, scratching at the soil, occasionally looking up at me with quick, curious glances before darting back to her side. The first wave that hit me was fear, a gut-level, bone-deep kind of fear that comes when you realize you're standing way too close to something that can end you without much effort. I froze, barely breathing, my body locked in place before my brain even had the chance to think through options. A sow with a cub is one of the most dangerous things you can run into in the woods. Every hiker knows it. She didn't need to charge, didn't need to roar. Her very presence was a warning. And then, as if she felt me staring, she lifted her head. Her eyes met mine. The cub kept scratching at the dirt, distracted by whatever bugs they were after, but she held me in her gaze. No sound, no movement, just a steady look that pinned me where I stood. There was no mistaking the message in it. I could feel it more than I could describe it. I see you. I know you're there. I can end this in a second if I need to, but I won't if you don't give me a reason. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. I wanted to back away, but instinct told me not to move too fast. Don't run. Don't challenge. Don't get closer. Just stay calm. So I eased myself back, just a few steps, until I found a flat rock off to the side of the trail. I sat down slowly, keeping her in sight, my hands resting on my knees so she could see I wasn't a threat. The bear dropped her head again, back to her digging. The cub shuffled around her, every so often letting out little huffs and squeaks as it tried to imitate what its mother was doing. So there I was, sitting maybe 30 feet away, watching this bear and her cub work at the hillside. The longer I sat, the more the fear shifted into something else. I was still scared, no doubt, but it was wrapped up with awe. To be that close, to see them not in a zoo or on a screen, but right there in front of me, it was like watching the woods themselves move and breathe. The sow tore at the earth with massive swipes of her paws, flipping chunks of soil aside like it was nothing. Every so often she'd shove her nose into the hole she was working on, snorting, licking, chewing at whatever insects or grubs she unearthed. The cub copied her clumsily, pawing at smaller patches of dirt, then bouncing back when it got distracted by a beetle or root. Time stretched in a strange way. I lost track of minutes. My legs grew stiff where I sat, but I didn't dare shift too much. Every crack of a twig under her weight, every shake of her fur when she stood, sent my nerves jangling again. But she never advanced, never showed her teeth, never made a sound in my direction. It was like she'd decided I wasn't worth worrying about, as long as I stayed put. At one point, she lifted her head again, nose in the air. I watched her test the wind, her muzzle twitching as she sniffed. For a moment, I thought she might finally decide she'd had enough of me sitting there and move closer. My body went rigid, lungs tight, waiting. She glanced my way again, eyes flicking over me, steady, calm, not aggressive. Then she huffed once, a deep rumbling sound, and turned back to her work. The cub tumbled in the dirt beside her, paws muddy, fur dusted with soil. I caught myself smiling despite the nerves, the way you can't help but be caught off guard by something so raw and wild. 20 minutes must have passed, though it felt both shorter and longer. The snowmelt trickled faintly somewhere down the slope. Birds chirped high in the canopy, but all I could hear was the sound of her claws tearing into earth and the occasional rustle of the cub. Finally, she stopped. She stood still, head up, ears turning. She swung her massive frame toward the slope, gave a short grunt, and the cub immediately scrambled to her side. Together they turned and moved off the trail, disappearing into the undergrowth. No rush, no panic, just calm, steady movement, like they had simply finished what they came to do. And then they were gone. The woods felt emptier after that. The silence that settled over the trail wasn't the same silence I'd felt before. It was heavier, charged, like the air itself held the memory of them. I sat a while longer, my legs numb, my heartbeat still slower than normal as it tried to settle back down. When I finally stood, my knees stiff and my back sore, I looked at the patch of earth they'd torn up. Clumps of dirt scattered across the hillside, claw marks carved deep into the soil. Proof that it hadn't been something I imagined, that I hadn't just dreamed it all in some haze of solitude. I adjusted my pack straps and started walking again, careful, slow, scanning every bend in the trail with new eyes. The forest hadn't changed, but I had. It wasn't just fear I carried with me, it was respect. A deep, humbling respect for the fact that I had stepped into their world, and they had chosen to let me leave it. The memory has stuck with me ever since. Not because it was violent or dramatic, but because it was so simple. A meeting on a trail, a silent understanding, and a reminder that out here, no matter how prepared I think I am, the wild will always have the final say. That day, I walked away with more than just a story. I walked away with a lesson burned into me. In the deep woods, you aren't in control. You're a guest. And sometimes, if you're lucky, the wild lets you leave unharmed. I was in Shenandoah, hiking one of the longer trails that weaves up and around the ridges. Shenandoah has its own feel. Rolling mountains that seem endless when you look out from a high point, thick forests that close in tight around the trail, and this strange mix of wilderness and humanity because of how popular the park is. It isn't untouched. You feel the presence of people even when you're alone. There's wear on the trails, trash sometimes tucked in corners, voices carried from a distance. And yet, the woods themselves still hold their weight, still remind you that you're in their space. That afternoon was clear, hot, and sticky. The kind of day where the air feels heavy, and the leaves don't even move unless there's a breeze strong enough to push through the canopy. I had been hiking for a couple of hours already, moving slow, stopping at overlooks when they appeared. The trails were scattered with other people earlier in the day, but by the time I was a few miles in, it felt quieter. The sounds of cars and crowds had faded behind me. It was just me, the trees, the hum of insects, and the crunch of my boots against the dirt. I wasn't expecting much. I'd seen deer before, plenty of squirrels, and the occasional snake sunning itself on a rock. But when I rounded a bend that cut tight around a slope, I stopped in my tracks. There, right off the trail, was a black bear, not lumbering off into the woods, not startled by my approach, not even standing up on all fours like you'd expect. This bear was just sitting down, on its ass, like a person. It was maybe 20 feet away, close enough that I could see the sunlight shining off its fur. It had a thick round body, a heavy belly, and its front paws held up a branch it had pulled down. And it was chewing on a cluster of leaves, slow and deliberate, like it was some kind of oversized panda. For a second, I just stared. It wasn't even threatening. It looked casual, comfortable, completely unbothered by the fact that I was standing there frozen, staring at it. I knew bears were common in Shenandoah, but I had always pictured them slinking off as soon as they smelled or saw a person. That's what you hear. Most of the time, black bears avoid humans. They're skittish. They keep their distance. But this one, it didn't care at all. I felt that wave of tension rise up anyway, though. My body's first response was fear, a tightening in my chest, a voice in the back of my head that said, "This thing could cross that space in a blink. If it wanted to, you'd have no chance." My hand hovered near the strap of my pack where I kept my bear spray, but I didn't move to grab it yet. I didn't want to trigger anything by shifting too fast. The bear looked at me once, just a quick glance, then went right back to chewing. It tore the leaves off one at a time, chewing with this steady rhythm, its jaw working, its eyes half closed in lazy contentment. It looked like it had been doing this for hours, and it planned on doing it for hours more. I waited, standing still, thinking maybe it would notice me and decide to move on. But it didn't. It just sat there, plucking and chewing, as if I didn't even exist. I don't know how long I stood there before I realized it wasn't going to change the situation. The trail cut close to the slope, and the bear was parked right beside it. There wasn't much space to maneuver. If I wanted to keep going, I was going to have to pass it somehow. That thought made my stomach twist. Everything I knew told me not to get close, But everything about its behavior told me it didn't care in the slightest. It was so used to people, so dulled by the constant stream of hikers, that I wasn't even a blip on its radar. I waited another few minutes, weighing my options, my legs growing stiff. Eventually, I figured the only way forward was to give it as much room as possible and slide by slowly. I didn't like the idea. My mind kept replaying images of it lunging at me, or the sudden sound of it deciding to defend its snack. But the longer I stood there, the more ridiculous I felt just waiting. So I eased myself forward one step at a time. The trail narrowed, forcing me close to the bear, closer than I wanted. My boots pressed against the very edge of the dirt path where it dropped down the slope. My heart hammered in my chest. Every crunch of gravel underfoot sounded too loud, too sharp. The bear didn't move. It didn't growl, didn't shift, didn't even turn its head to follow me. It just kept chewing, pulling leaves, working its jaws, staring into the middle distance like I was nothing more than another tree in the forest. When I was directly across from it, less than 15 feet away, my nerves were stretched thin. I could see the twitch of its ears, the damp shine of its nose, the flecks of its claws gripping the branch it held. I kept my eyes low, not staring, not challenging. My palms were slick with sweat, and every step forward felt like it stretched into forever. Finally, I passed it. The trail curved again, and the trees closed around the bend. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, my shoulders sinking as the distance grew. My heart still pounded, but the adrenaline was already easing into something else, something closer to disbelief. It wasn't until I'd gone another 100 yards that I stopped and turned back. The bear was still there, still sitting, still chewing like nothing had changed. From where I stood, it looked almost comical, like some massive, lazy creature pretending to be human. I adjusted my pack and kept moving, but the image stayed with me. Not just the humor of it, but the edge too, because under all that calm, all that indifference, was the reminder of how quickly things could have gone another way. If it had decided I was too close, if it had gotten annoyed, if it had felt like proving a point. That's the part that stayed with me the longest. It wasn't just the sight of the bear. It was the realization of how much the park and the constant flood of tourists had changed them. They didn't run anymore. They didn't care. They'd gotten used to people being part of the background. And that's not comfort. It's danger. Because one day, one hiker won't be cautious, won't respect the distance, won't read the signals. And the bear that sat there chewing leaves like a panda will remind them exactly what it is capable of. When I finally made it back to the trailhead that evening, the memory of it still pressed against me. Not fear anymore, not even adrenaline. Just a sober, heavy respect. That close to power, that close to something wild. It sticks with you. And I knew one thing for certain. The next time I heard someone joke about Shenandoah bears not giving a damn about people anymore, I'd believe them. But I'd also remember how thin that line really was. Because I'd been close enough to see it in the eyes of one. And close enough to know that even when they act like they don't care, you're never really safe. I was up north, far north in British Columbia, Canada. The kind of north that swallows you up if you aren't careful. Where the roads go on for hours without another vehicle and the forests seem to stretch forever, one ridge after another, until they blend into the horizon. I was working in a rig camp out in the woods, miles from any town, living in those prefab bunkhouses surrounded by snow, diesel fumes, and silence. My job wasn't glamorous. I was the camp cook. I fed the crews, kept the kitchen running, made sure the guys had something hot and heavy in their stomachs before and after their long shifts. Days blurred into one another. Wake up before dawn, get breakfast ready, clean up, prep lunch, serve dinner, scrub everything down, and try to sleep through the noise of generators and the creaks of cold metal siding. It was deep winter when this happened. That kind of northern winter where the cold doesn't just sting your skin. It gets inside you. It seeps into your lungs when you breathe and settles in your bones. Temperatures could drop past -30 without warning. Snow piled so high around the camp you had to shovel your way from one building to another just to avoid wading waist-deep through powder. The machines were always running, trying to stay warm, and even then, Half the time someone's truck wouldn't start in the morning. You learn to live with it. You learn to respect it. That's just the way it is up there. This was one of those quiet days. The crews were out, and I had finished the lunch prep earlier than usual. The kitchen was warm, the ovens humming, and the smell of bread hung in the air. I stepped outside onto the back deck for a smoke. It was around 2 in the afternoon, still light out, though the daylight didn't stretch long this far north in winter. I remember how still it was that day. No wind, no sound of branches creaking, no distant hum of trucks, just absolute stillness. The kind of silence you only get in the far north, where the land is so vast and empty it swallows every sound. It was snowing, not heavy, but steady. Big, slow flakes drifting down, the kind that look like they take forever to fall. The world seemed to move in slow motion. My breath hung in the air, curling in front of me before dissolving into the white. I leaned against the railing, cigarette burning between my fingers, and stared out past the camp. I wasn't really looking at anything, just letting my eyes wander the way you do when you're tired, glancing left, right, down at my boots, back at the falling snow, then further out into the trees. It was calming in its own way. The snow muffled everything, and for a moment it felt like I was the only person alive out there. That's when it hit me, that feeling. The kind you don't mistake once you've felt it. Like someone's eyes are on you, not just being watched but seen. It started as a weight in my chest, then moved up to the back of my neck. The kind of feeling that makes the hair there stand up even before you understand why. I froze, cigarette halfway to my lips, and let my eyes focus straight ahead. The tree line was only about 30 feet away from the back deck. A wall of dark spruce, tall and thick, their branches sagging under the weight of fresh snow. And there, right between two of them, was the biggest wolf I had ever seen in my life. It wasn't moving, just sitting there. The first thing I noticed was the size. It didn't look like any wolf I had seen in pictures or books, or even the few I'd glimpsed at a distance before. Sitting down, it was as tall as a man standing. Its head was massive, shoulders broad, and the chest looked like it could plow through a wall. Its fur was thick and dark, blending into the shadows of the trees except for the snow collecting along its back. And its eyes, it was staring right at me, locked in on me like I was the only thing in its world. Yellow, sharp, steady, those eyes didn't waver. It wasn't snarling. It wasn't pacing. It was just sitting there, completely still, like it had been waiting for me to notice. For a long second, I couldn't move. I didn't even breathe. My mind scrambled, trying to size up what I was seeing, to process how something that big could be that close without me noticing. 30 feet isn't far. Could cover that in seconds. I felt small, not just physically, but stripped down to something primal, like the forest had reminded me where I stood in the order of things. My cigarette burned down between my fingers, forgotten, as my chest tightened. I don't know how long I stood there staring. Time bent in that silence. It might have been a few seconds. It might have been a minute. All I know is that I broke the gaze. My eyes flicked away, maybe to the snow, maybe just out of instinct. And when I snapped them back just like that, it was gone. No sound, no movement, no cracking branches or snow shifting under its weight. 1 second it was there, the next it wasn't. The space between the trees looked empty, like it had never been there at all. But I knew what I had seen. I stood there frozen, cigarette burned down to the filter, smoke curling up into the snow. My hands shook a little, and it wasn't from the cold. I scanned the tree line over and over, trying to catch another glimpse, trying to convince myself it was still there. Nothing, just the same heavy silence pressing in. The strangest part wasn't even the sight of it. It was the feeling it left behind. It wasn't like a predator stalking prey, not exactly. It was more like it wanted me to know it had seen me, like it was saying, I could cross the space and take you apart if I wanted. But I won't. Not today. Eventually, I dropped the cigarette but into the snow and went back inside. The warmth of the kitchen felt unreal, like I had stepped back into another world. The smell of bread, the hum of the ovens, the clatter of pots. It was all the same, but I wasn't. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting to look out and see those eyes staring back through the window. I never told anyone in camp. I don't know why. Maybe because it sounded like something you'd make up. Maybe because saying it out loud would make it less real or more real. I'm still not sure. But I kept it to myself. For the rest of that winter, every time I stepped out for a smoke, I felt it. That weight, that possibility hanging in the tree line. I never saw it again. Not once. But it didn't matter. The image stayed with me. That wolf, if you can even call something like that just a wolf, had burned itself into my memory. And the message it left was clear. Out there, in those woods, I wasn't in charge. Not even close. It wasn't a story about being attacked. It wasn't a brush with death. It was something quieter, heavier. A reminder that the land up there belongs to things far older, far stronger than us. And sometimes, if you're unlucky, or maybe if you're very lucky, you get to meet their eyes. I'll never forget that afternoon. The snow falling slow, the silence pressing in, and that massive shape in the trees, watching me the way a storm watches the ground before it breaks. And then gone like it had never been there. But I'll always remember. I had been camping in the deep woods of a state park in Texas, one of those sprawling places where the trails seem endless and the lakes cut into the trees like wide black mirrors. It wasn't my first time out there, and I liked the way the park seemed quieter than most. Fewer people, fewer cars on the roads at night, and a lot of long stretches where it felt like you were really out there, away from everything. The plan that night was simple. I'd already pitched my tent and cooked some food back at the site. The air was hot, humid enough that the sweat clung to me even when I was sitting still. I didn't feel like crawling into my sleeping bag yet. I had my dog with me, and he wasn't tired either. He was pacing around, sniffing everything, that restless energy he always had at night. So I decided to ride down to the dock and get some fishing in. I grabbed my rod and a small tackle box, clipped the dog's leash to his collar, and set off on my bike. The ride was maybe 5 minutes, all through woods so dark the beam of my headlamp felt like it barely scratched the surface. Bugs flickered in and out of the light, and the crunch of gravel under my tires was the only steady sound. When I reached the dock area, I coasted into the small parking lot and leaned my bike against a wooden post. From there, the ground sloped down toward the water, a patch of marsh grass stretching maybe 20 or 30 feet before the dock itself began. The dock jutted out straight into the lake, a long, narrow path of weathered boards with one tall lamp humming faintly near the end. Its glow made a soft yellow pool on the water, but beyond that, the lake was just a wide sheet of darkness. The shoreline on the far side disappeared into black. My dog trotted beside me as I walked out, nails clicking against the boards. I set my tackle box down and cast my first line. The splash echoed across the still water, ripples spreading, then fading back into glass. The first 20 minutes were calm. Just me and the dog, the quiet of the woods pressing in, the occasional croak of a frog or the buzz of insects under the light. The air smelled damp, thick with mud and algae, the kind of smell that tells you the water is shallow near shore with weeds underneath. I kept casting, the sound of each lure hitting the water the only thing breaking the silence. That's when I noticed the shape. At first, I thought it was a log drifting across the surface. Just a long, dark mass sliding slow and steady. But it wasn't bobbing. It wasn't moving the way wood should move on still water. My dog picked up on it before I did. His head snapped up, ears stiff, a low growl rising in his throat. I leaned forward, eyes narrowing. The shape glided closer, smooth, deliberate. And then the dock light caught two glowing eyes. A gator. Not just any gator. This thing was huge, wide-backed, its ridges breaking the surface, its head cutting a path straight toward the dock. It looked like a piece of the swamp itself had come alive, a whole tree trunk sliding forward with nothing but quiet intent. Its eyes locked with mine. For a moment, I couldn't move. My chest tightened, breath caught halfway in my throat. My dog growled louder, shifting close to me, tail stiff, body tense. The gator drifted to a stop just a few yards from the dock, floating there with only its head and part of its back visible. The rest of it was hidden under black water, but I could picture it. Massive tail, heavy body, more strength than I could imagine. I tried to steady myself. I'd seen gators before, but not like this. Not one this size, not one this close, and not one that felt so clearly locked in on us. I told myself maybe it was curious, maybe drawn by the splash of my lure. So I kept fishing, trying to act like nothing had changed, though my eyes kept darting back to that shadow in the water. But then I noticed something else. Every time I shifted sides, the gator followed. I cast to the left and it would glide left. I'd move down the dock and it would slide across, silent as death, to line up beneath me again. Always there, always watching. I stayed out there for 3 hours. 3 hours of trying to pretend I wasn't being stalked. The dog never calmed. He paced, growled, sat pressed against my legs, ears constantly tracking the water. The gator never left. By the time I finally decided to pack it in, my nerves were frayed. I reeled in, closed the tackle box, and stood. The moment I moved, the gator shifted too. It started to glide toward the marshy shoreline, following my path. That was when I realized the truth. It wasn't just curious. It wasn't hanging around for nothing. It wanted my dog. The way it tracked us, the way its eyes fixed on him more than me, the way it stayed patient, biding its time. Dogs were perfect prey for gators. Small enough to grab, just enough movement to trigger their instinct. I'd read stories before, fishermen warning each other about how gators would come in just for the chance at a dog, how they remembered spots where scraps or guts had been tossed before. And now here I was, standing at the end of a dock, my dog practically vibrating with tension, and a monster in the water that wanted him bad enough to wait hours for its chance. I froze, heart hammering. The parking lot with my bike sat 100 feet away, up past the marsh grass. Between me and it was nothing but wet ground and this predator, sliding closer. The dog pressed against my leg, growling low, and all I could think was that if I hesitated too long, he'd leap at the gator first. He wasn't a big dog, but he was loyal enough to get himself killed. I had nothing to fight with. No gun, no blade big enough to matter, not even a stick. My only chance was to distract it. I stepped to the far side of the dock, pulse pounding in my ears, and pissed into the water. The sound was loud, unnatural, echoing across the lake. Ripples spread, the smell and splash hitting the surface. The gator's head snapped toward it instantly, body gliding in that direction, searching for the source. That was my moment. I yanked the dog's leash tight and ran. The boards thundered under my boots as I bolted for the shore. My dog strained beside me, ears back, legs pumping. The marsh grass whipped at my shins, mud sucking at my soles as I splashed through, lungs burning with every stride. I didn't look back, couldn't. Every instinct screamed that if I turned, I'd see that massive shape exploding out of the water, charging. The parking lot felt like it was a mile away, but I reached it, half slipping on the gravel as I grabbed my bike. My hands fumbled at the handlebars, leash wrapped around my wrist, and then I was pedaling, hard, wheels spitting gravel as we shot down the park road. My dog ran beside me, tethered, his body stretched to keep pace, tongue lolling, but he never slowed. I pedaled until my thighs screamed, until the air tore at my lungs, until the glow of the campground lights finally broke through the trees. Only then did I let myself stop. The road behind us was empty, silent. The woods pressed in, calm again, as if nothing had happened. But my body was shaking, my hands slick on the handlebars, my dog still wide-eyed and panting. Back at the campsite, I collapsed into a chair, staring into the dark. The gator hadn't followed, but I couldn't shake the image. The way it had tracked us for hours, patient, silent, waiting for me to slip, waiting for the chance to grab what it really wanted. Not me, my dog. And I knew, deep down, that if I had hesitated even a little longer, or if the distraction hadn't worked, I would have watched that monster take him under. I didn't sleep much that night. Every rustle in the brush set me on edge. Every splash I thought I heard from the lake echoed in my head. But nothing else came. Still, the memory of those glowing eyes in the dock light stuck with me. Not just because I'd been close to danger, but because I'd seen so clearly what it wanted, and how patient it had been in waiting for it. and I knew I'd never bring my dog that close to the water again. I never thought I'd be the type to get spooked by something as simple as water, but when you're deep in the woods, far away from towns or highways or even other people, the mind changes how it sees things. The same lake that looks calm and inviting during the day turns into something else entirely at night. It stops being a place for fishing or cooling off and becomes a black sheet of mystery, with nothing but your imagination filling in the gaps. That was the setting the night this happened. I had driven out to a state park where the woods pressed tight against the shoreline of a sprawling lake. I had a simple setup, a small tent, a sleeping bag, and the essentials for cooking and fishing. It wasn't my first camping trip, but it was one of the lonelier ones. The campsites weren't crowded, and I'd deliberately chosen a spot far from the few RVs and families scattered closer to the entrance. I wanted quiet. I wanted to hear the woods without anyone else cutting in. By day, it was peaceful. I spent the hours wandering trails, watching birds dart in and out of the tree canopy, feeling the crunch of dry leaves under my boots. The lake was wide, still in most places, except for where wind pushed small ripples toward the shallows. I didn't see much wildlife, aside from the usual deer slipping between trees, squirrels darting up trunks, the occasional turtle sunning itself on a log. By night, though, things changed. That first evening, the crickets were so loud they almost drowned out my thoughts. Frogs croaked from the marshy edge of the lake, and somewhere in the distance, something splashed. Big enough that I knew it wasn't a fish. Probably a beaver, I told myself. Or maybe a heron diving. Still, it sat in the back of my mind. I had set my camp close to the shoreline, maybe 20 or 30 yards back. The trees opened just enough to give me a view of the water through the branches. After dinner, I sat on a small folding chair, just looking at the reflection of the moon stretching like a silver path across the lake. It was hot, sticky, unmoving air that clung to me. Even at night, it didn't cool off much. The fire I'd built only made it worse. I thought about going down to the dock, just to get closer to the water where there might be a breeze. I grabbed a flashlight and walked the path. The dock stretched out maybe 50 feet into the lake, an old wooden thing with gaps in the boards and a single weather-beaten post light buzzing faintly at the end. The water slapped gently against the supports underneath, the sound steady but hollow, like a slow heartbeat. I stood there for a while, leaning on the railing, just watching. The woods around me seemed endless. Behind the tree line, the blackness was complete. No cars, no cabin lights, no distant highway hum. Just dark. That's when the thought hit me. I knew gators lived in lakes further south, but I didn't think about them much up here. Still, my brain wouldn't let it go. I kept picturing one lurking just under the water's surface, sliding silently through the shallows, invisible except for those eyes. And then, uninvited, came the image of it lunging up, jaws opening, grabbing me where I stood vulnerable at the edge, grabbing me low in the worst possible place. I laughed at myself, but the laugh died quick, because the longer I stood there, the less funny it seemed. I shifted my feet back from the edge, feeling a little stupid for even letting the idea take hold. But it did, and once it did, it stuck like a thorn. Every ripple in the water looked like something moving. Every splash of a fish tail sounded like something heavier, something waiting. I told myself to calm down, but my body wasn't listening. My skin prickled, my chest felt tight, and my eyes wouldn't stop darting across the surface of the water. The thought just wouldn't leave. If something big surged out, I'd have no time to react. And then I noticed it, a shape, out past the glow of the dock light. At first, it looked like driftwood, just floating along. But it was moving wrong, not bobbing or spinning, sliding. I clicked my flashlight on and aimed it. The beam cut through the dark, and two faint points reflected back. They stayed there, unblinking, just above the waterline. The rest of the shape was hidden, but I didn't need to see more. My stomach dropped. It was close enough that I could make out the faint ridges breaking the water behind it, a line that stretched longer than I wanted to believe. My mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe it was a log, maybe the eyes were something else. But I knew. Deep down, I knew exactly what it was. A gator. I froze, barely breathing. It didn't move fast, didn't thrash or surge. It just sat there, steady, like it had been watching long before I noticed. My skin crawled. My first instinct was to back up, but I didn't want to make noise. The dock creaked even when I shifted my weight slightly, and the thought of sudden movement sending vibrations through the boards made me sick. I just stood there, locked in that stare, my mind racing. Then it started to drift closer. Slow, deliberate, not charging, not lunging, just closing the distance with that smooth, unnerving glide that made the water ripple evenly around its head. I stepped back, careful, 1 foot behind the other. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might echo in the quiet. My eyes flicked to the shoreline. It wasn't far, but between me and it was 20 feet of dock and a stretch of wet marsh grass. Plenty of space for something that size to cut me off. Another step back. The wood groaned. The gator stopped. For a moment, it didn't move at all. Just floated there, eyes fixed on me, water lapping softly at the pilings below. My throat went dry. The image came back. The sickening thought of it bursting upward, jaws snapping, dragging me down. I forced myself to turn. Slow at first, then faster, my boots thudding against the boards as I walked back toward shore. I didn't run. I couldn't, but every muscle screamed at me to. My flashlight beam shook with each step, bouncing across the planks and into the grass. When I reached solid ground, I turned the light back toward the water. The shape was still there, just at the edge of the glow, watching. I backed up until the trees swallowed the dock, then kept going until the faint orange of my campfire came into view. My dog was waiting there, tail wagging, oblivious to what had just happened. I sat down hard in my chair, chest heaving, sweat running cold down my back. The gator never followed, at least not onto land. But the feeling it left behind didn't fade. For the rest of the night, I couldn't shake it. I kept picturing those eyes, locked in, calculating. I knew then that the fear I'd laughed off, the thought of it lunging up and grabbing me, wasn't far-fetched at all. It was real, too real. Lying in my tent later, every sound outside made me flinch. A splash, a rustle, even the steady rhythm of frogs and crickets. It all sounded like a warning. The woods didn't feel peaceful anymore. They felt alive in a way I hadn't wanted to acknowledge. And that image of the gator's eyes, steady and patient, burned into me. I left the next morning earlier than planned. I packed quickly, didn't bother with breakfast, and loaded everything into the car. When I drove past the lake, it looked calm again, sunlight glittering off the water as if nothing had happened. Families would be showing up later, kids running down that same dock, fishermen tossing lines, dogs splashing at the edge. None of them would know. None of them would feel what I felt standing there in the dark. But I knew, and I'll never forget the way it felt to realize that something so quiet, so patient, could wait just beneath the surface, watching close enough to strike. Close enough that the thought of losing everything in one lunge didn't feel like a joke anymore. Felt real, too real, and it left me with a respect I'd never lose, not just for what's in the water, but for how fast the woods can remind you you're not the one in control out there.